Hello, and welcome to a bonus episode of Folk Files, in which we will touch on the life and times of Anna Gordon, also known as Mrs. Brown of Falkland, one of the most famous source singers in the history of folk music from the British Isles. As a reminder, a source singer is the person from whom a folk song is collected, someone who organically learned the song from oral tradition. This is going to be very different from other episodes in that I won't be doing very much talking, which is good because, as you can probably hear, I've got a little bit of laryngitis. Instead, I have interviewed Ruth Perry, a professor emerita from MIT. Ruth has a very impressive resume. To name just a few of her accolades, she has been awarded grants from multiple institutions such as the Ford Foundation, Guggenheim, and National Science Foundation. She founded the MIT Women's Studies program in 1984, and, important for our purposes, she was president of Cornell's Folk Song Club in the early 60s. This year, she finished her latest book, titled The Ballad World of Anna Gordon, Mrs. Brown of Falkland. In the episode notes, you can find out how to purchase the book, complete with a discount, as well as a link to the companion website, which has recordings of 12 of Anna Gordon's ballads. Some of the topics covered in this interview include the surprising things Ruth discovered about 18th century Scotland, the process of recording the ballads, and Ruth's theories about how Lamkin, which is one of Anna Gordon's ballads, ended up in America. So, without further ado, please enjoy this interview with Ruth Perry.
How brents your brow, my lady Elspat? How golden yellow is your hair? Of all the maids of fair Scotland, there's none like Lady Elspat fair.
I have Ruth Perry here with me now. Thank you so much, Ruth, for joining me.
My pleasure.
So we're going to jump right on in. So I'm very curious, when did you first get the idea to start working on this book?
Well, I wanted to do another biography. I did a biography of a early English feminist named Mary Astle way back in 1986. And I have wanted to do another biography ever since. But the problem was that every woman writer that I found, that I decided I would start working on, and there were about 3 false starts, I found that some younger scholar was beginning work and was trying, and I felt that that person needed to do it more than I needed to do it, and so I gave up the field. And finally, I thought, Anna Gordon is mentioned on the very first page of Child, and I'm an old folk singer, and I've always loved ballads, and I must have noticed that Child said, "No ballads are superior to those sung by Mrs. Brown of Falkland in the last century." And I thought, and I went looking for what people knew about her. And every folklorist worth their salt has written about Anna Gordon's because there are several versions of her ballads, and they compare them and they talk about whether she memorized them or recreated them. And there are a lot of controversies about the differences between the different recordings of the same ballad by her. So folklorists are on to Mrs. Brown of Falkland, and that's the name they know her by. But nobody knew a damn thing about the person. So since I had done an extremely difficult biography of somebody about whom nothing was known a long time ago, I thought, okay, I could do something here. And so that was it. And also I had just decided that I was going to write something about the collecting of ballads in the 18th century, because after working on 18th century culture and literature for my entire career in England, I don't know why it took me so long. I suddenly realized that the collecting of folk songs began in the 18th century. the century that I was, familiar with and knew something about. And so when the Folger Library, God, that was a long time ago, when the Folger Library called me up and asked if I would do a seminar on 18th century novels, which is what I was known for. I said, I'm not doing novels anymore. I'm doing ballads now. And so they signed me up for a postdoc seminar on 18th century collecting of ballads. And that was really the beginning of my scholarly descent into this world. Um, because I didn't know very much about that whole world. And I certainly didn't know anything about Scotland. And Scotland was a very different country from England, especially in the 18th century. It was very, very different. That was probably the most amazing things that I learned were about 18th century Scotland. What an interesting, fascinating country.
Yeah. I was surprised too, reading some of your sections, especially women in balladry, women in Scotland, and how much better it was for them in Scotland than in England.
Exactly. Right. I mean, it's not as if there wasn't patriarchal culture, because there was, but they had a lot more rights and they were, better educated, everything. Yeah, it's true. They could own property. Her grandmother got a divorce in 1703. That's just amazing. She initiated, the legal proceedings, and she got a divorce from her husband in 1703. English women didn't get divorces until the 19th century. And then, I mean, it's such a weird story. They got married again. They got married again when he met her at a party and he was just fascinated by her. Now that's a story that I tell in this book. Should I read it?
Yeah, I would love that.
Here we are. William Forbes possessed a handsome estate and married very early in life a lady remarkable for her beauty. Now, this story, by the way, I've copied it exactly as Anna Gordon's niece wrote it down. And she must have gotten it from her mother, who was Anna Gordon's older sister. He became giddy and extravagant, neglected his affairs and his wife. Finding she could not reclaim him, separated from him, after which they did not see each other for 20 years. They then accidentally met at the house of a mutual friend. He did not recognize his wife, but was charmed with her beauty. And after he had left her friend's house, Mr. Forbes spoke in raptures of her and lamented his hard fate that he was not at liberty to offer himself. The lady of the house, smiling, asked him if he had no recollection of seeing that lady before, and he replied, none. She then informed him that the lady was his wedded wife. He then implored her to bring about a reconciliation, and she promised to do her best on condition he would convince her that he was a changed man. After the preliminaries were settled, they were reunited, and Lilias Forbes, the first wife of Professor Thomas Gordon, that's Anna's dad, Lilias Forbes, who was her mother, was born after their second union. Their eldest daughter was married to Professor Thomas Gordon's older brother, and there were 25 years between the two sisters.
That explains the big age gap. Wow, what a story. Who is that woman? She looks vaguely familiar.
I know. It's There are a
Extraordinary.
number of stories in that family that really are like ballad stories. I mean, that's why I call the book The Ballad World, because it felt like she was living in the middle of a lot of ballads,
Hmm.
intersecting ballads.
Yeah. And some of them truly were. I know you talk about some of the ballads that you can actually trace to people related to her.
Right. And she's visited the locations. Yeah, that's right. The Baron of Brakely. Yeah.
You mentioned a little earlier that you are a folk singer yourself, and I know you talk about in the book being heavily involved in the in Cornell University's folk club. So, Do you still, I say perform in folk singing, performing is way more of a community activity. Do you still perform? And if so, has all of this learning influenced the way you perform these ballads?
Well, at my age, your voice gets really croaky if you don't do it every day and practice it. So what tends to happen is that I tend to let it go. And then there's an occasion coming up, a folk sing at a friend's house or something. And then I work on it. I practice, I sing, I do vocal exercises. I get my range not entirely back, but enough. And then I sing for a while. And then life interferes again and it goes down the drain again. It used to be that I could just sing anytime, anywhere, but you have to really keep that muscle, you know, uh, lubricated. Yeah. But your question is a good one, and I did when I started working on Anna, and I started learning some of her songs because I used to give papers that different universities and conferences and whatever, and I would give papers on Anna Gordon, and I would sing something usually. And I must say that academic audiences were very grateful to have something in addition to the usual words, right? So I would just lay down my papers and sing without any accompaniment, and people would straighten up, wake up, really. Um, when I was learning those ballads that I would s- perform that way, I was much more perfectionist about it. I really wanted to learn the tunes as they had been written down back then in 1783, and I wanted to learn the words exactly. Before that, I sang the way folk singers do with slight changes here and there. I mean, one of my friends is a really seriously good folk singer, Peggy Seeger,
Mm.
and she used to fault me because I would get sloppy about tunes and elide them. I mean, she's very precise.
Mhm.
So I know that I did that. I know that I would, not be that precise. But when I learned these ballads, I was precise. I was very careful because I suddenly felt this mission to pass on what they were and not what I had changed, but how I got them exactly. So I was it did change how I learned and performed these ballads.
I love that.
Yeah.
And so we have the companion website with all of the beautifully recorded ballads. Um,
Oh,
and
aren't they
they're
wonderful?
wonderful. And one thing I have to say is that I love, so it's mostly Alison McMorland and Joe Miller, correct, singing the
Yes.
ballads.
Allison does 8
Hmm.
and Joe Miller does 4. There are 12 altogether.
Hmm.
12 magnificently recorded ballads. It took us a long time. It might have taken even 5 years
Wow.
to get, because they learned those tunes from manuscript. And the way Allison did it, because she's such a great singer and she wanted to learn them through the ears.
Hmm.
So she hired a fiddler to play those tunes, and she listened to them until she had them inside of her. And then she learned the words and put the words to them.
That feels so authentic, like the how they used to teach broadsides. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and it took, and those ballads are long. I mean, they're involved. So it took a long time. And I think that this CD is just, I mean, I think it's magnificent. I think it's a real masterpiece.
And one very specific thing I love about the recordings is that, along with just having excellent skill, you expect these days when you hear a recording for everything to be ironed out so you don't hear any mouth noises or breaths or anything, but you can always hear the raw these are long ballads, so hearing the little breaths, the little hitches of breath as someone's about to start, the 12th verse is really beautiful for me.
Right, I
Yeah.
agree. And we didn't do any reverb. I mean, Allison really masterminded the recording of this, and she wanted to see if she could duplicate domestic music making. She wanted the sound to be warm and, untainted by, as you say, by that kind of perfection, as if it so that it would sound like domestic music making back in the 18th century. And even the instrumentalists are members of the
Oh,
family.
wow.
That is, the flute player is Joe Miller's son, and her own daughter sings the choruses on Baron of
Oh, I
Brakely.
love that.
I mean, so there's family involved in this, and that was on purpose also. I mean, there are a couple of other musicians that are just close friends, but the instruments that are used, and they're very, as you notice, very few and far between, and they don't accompany because they didn't do accompanied singing in the 18th century. So they just come in and go out as if somebody's sitting in the room, picking up the flute, picking up the fiddle, and then putting it down again.
That's great.
That's Yeah, it's supposed to sound, unrehearsed, and just people are moved to join in. But the particular instruments are instruments that were in Anna Gordon's family and would have been in the house. So that's authentic too. Everything is historically accurate.
Beautiful.
Oh, he has done him to his hall to make him beerly cheer. And in it came a grisly ghost, steed stapping i' the fleer. Her head at the reef tree of the house, your meadow ye mote well span. He's thrown to her his gay mantle, says Lady Hapierling can. Her teeth was all like tether stakes, her nose like club or mell, and I ken naething she peered to be but the fiend that wons in hell.
So a lot of the tunes come directly from Robert Eden Scott's notation, Robert Eden Scott being Anna's nephew, and then basically how they were interpreted by Bronson, who we've talked on this podcast about before, where he collected the tunes of the child ballads. But there are a couple situations where you had to choose between different tunes that have survived or that have been interpreted. And was that done by Allison, or did you have any hand in that as well?
No, that was Allison.
Wonderful.
First of all, we didn't use Bronson's tunes. We used Robert Eden Scott's tunes. And Bronson did conjectural readings of Robert Eden Scott's because he felt that the kid was 14 and had just learned the flute and maybe he didn't get it right. And Bronson substituted his conjectural readings, which were slightly different, tweaked from Robert Eden Scott's. But we used the originals. So this is the first and only time they've ever been actually sung to the way Robert Eden Scott notated it on staff paper.
Amazing. It's great to now have the original rather than the filtered version.
And then so there are 3 tunes that Allison had to figure out which to use, and we've given the tune sources. The tune sources are there on the companion website, and the CD. So anybody who listens to them can figure out which tune source was. And one of them was Sophia Scott, who was Walter Scott's daughter.
Oh, that's who that is. Amazing.
Yeah.
And how did you select these specific 12 ballads? And were there any ballads that were like just on the short list that you had to cut at the last second?
Well, my trouble with this book was that I was originally going to have a chapter about her repertoire, but the repertoire is 36 ballads, and it takes a long time to even just think about one of these ballads. They're so involved and long and complicated. And then I realized you couldn't possibly do it like that, that I'd had to leaven the whole thing with ballads. I'd have to put at least one ballad in every chapter to discuss. You couldn't discuss them all in one. It's ridiculous. So that's what I did. So I chose a ballad per chapter or two ballads per chapter. And then those are the ones that I told Allison we should record. So they are coordinated with the ballads that I discuss in the book.
Perfect.
Um, and the and the literary choice came first, but they are, some of my favorites, of
Of
course.
course. And I love that in the chapter where you talk about some of Anna Gordon's relatives and her sister marrying and going to the United States, that's where Lamkin shows up. And I know in our correspondence I said that just last month our featured ballad was Lamkin. So to start with, because a lot of what Folk Files is about is sort of following how ballads get to where they are now collected. Would you mind summarizing your theory and the scholarship around Anna's sister and how the ballad ended up in the United States?
Lamkin, first of all, Lamkin is a Flemish name, and there were a lot of Flemings that lived in the northeast of Scotland. There's a historical movement where land is given to them and they come over and so on. So there's a historical moment several centuries earlier where there's a bunch of Flemings come to that part of Scotland. So that made sense to me. And then there's this, as you know, there's that difference that the Scottish versions all explain that Lamkin was a mason who didn't get paid, and he was taking revenge for that. And the Northumberland versions, the English versions, don't have a motiveless villain without explaining that he was an unpaid laborer. So, first of all, if you find a ballad that has somehow transmigrated to America that has a mason who wasn't paid, makes you think it probably came from Scotland. That's the first thing. um, but also, Anna Gordon's older sister, who had the same mother and the same aunt, and if they sang songs around the house that Anna picked up, her older sister would have picked them up also. I mean, her older sister's only 2 or 3 years older, so it's not such a huge gap. Elizabeth, her name was, and she left for America in, I think, 1770. And she went to America because she eloped with an American kid who had come over to Aberdeen to go to college. And they fell in love and they had a child. Elizabeth's husband went off to America to be the chaplain to the governor of Maryland, whose name was Robert Eden. And that explains their son's name. So Elizabeth went to America, and because her husband was thought possibly to be a loyalist rather than an American patriot, although he wrote many affidavits and letters and claimed and so on, and he was very chagrined, hurt that they didn't trust him. Nonetheless, the local, whatever it was, committee in Virginia said he could stay, but he'd have to go inland. He couldn't be on the coast. He had to go 100 miles from the coast inland if he was going to stay during the American Revolution. So they did. they set up a plantation 100 miles inland, in a particular county, and they staffed this plantation with slave labor, and that's a whole nother story because Anna Gordon's dad back in Scotland was against slavery and wrote an important paper for the Aberdeen Philosophical Society against slavery, way in advance of the people who are now being praised for it. But I think Thomas Gordon deserves credit for having started that ball rolling back in Aberdeen. In fact, I think Thomas Gordon is a really interesting intellectual. So that's another pitch that I make in this book is for somebody, please study his papers. He's really important. He's significant. Yeah. So Lamkin. So what I found was that there was a population in the 1880s, a population of illiterate Black folks living in the county that Elizabeth Gordon Scott's plantation had been, who knew Lamkin. And I surmised that she sang it, that they learned it from her. There was one other source, which was a book that had a version of Lamkin that dates back to the late 18th century when Elizabeth lived there. And there's a ballad book also found that had a version very close to what Anna Gordon's version of Lamkin was. So it could have come from that book or it could have come from Elizabeth, but both of them have are from this are Scottish versions from the late 18th century, which is what Anna Gordon's version is. So that's the story about Lamkin, and I really think, and I was very interested to see how those the newly liberated population in 1880, how they had changed the words, because I mean Lamkin is a great ballad for, to take revenge on white folks with, but they didn't. They sort of defanged it. They made it less violent, less bloody. I found that really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it was sung and popular, but it was not. It wasn't made to be a revenge ballad. It was toned down so much by that Black population. And I just found that really fascinating.
Yeah. I found that interesting too, because in my episode, I talk about how it feels like it's a song written for or by the working class, because it doesn't show the Lord and his lady in a very good light. But the fact both that that aspect of it wasn't dug into by the working class that was singing it, and then also that Anna's family seemed to really like it and sing a lot, and she was pretty well-to-do. Surprised me.
Well, but they were professionals. That was a professional family, whereas the laird who doesn't pay the mason is a laird. It's aristocracy. It's minor but it's aristocracy. That's a different class. So aristocracy and then professionals are a little bit below that.
Lamkin was a mason kid, as ever built wi' stane. He built Lord Weary's castle, but payment he got nane. Oh, pay me, Lord Weary, come pay me my fee. I canna pay ye, Lamkin, for I mun gang o'er the sea. Oh, pay me now, Lord Weary, come pay me your toe hand. I canna pay ye, Lamkin, unless I sell my land. Och, gin ye winna pay me, I here shall mak a vow. Before that ye come hame again, ye shall hae cause to rue. Lord Weary got a bonny ship to sail the salt sea fame, but his lady will the castle keep, aye, till he should come hame.
You mentioned already a few things that you found surprising about Scottish culture. Is there anything we haven't touched on yet?
The literacy. We haven't talked about the literacy. I think that partly explains both the improved position of women and also the democratizing of the culture, because there was in as early as 1695, the Scottish Parliament passed an act that required the landowners to support a schoolmaster as well as a minister in every parish in Scotland. So there were two educated men in every parish, at least. And the schoolmaster taught the boys and some of the girls. I mean, parents had to pay additional pennies for these classes. I mean, the schoolmaster got a salary from the heritors, the property owners, but in addition, the classes were supported just in a minor sort of way by parental fees, and parents were more likely to pay fees for boys than for girls, but they did. And in the 18th century, Scotland was the most literate country in all of Europe. The most literate country. That is also worth knowing. And there were lots of bursaries, as they call them, scholarships for poor kids to go to college. So, so the lad o' parts, as they were called, that is a smart kid, went to college, period. So there was mobility.
And I was also surprised at the command to have sang schools in most major towns as well. So you had these musicians also, or at least like music schools, music is being taught consistently throughout Scotland, which I feel like really digs into the idea that music is such a huge part of the national culture.
Right. That was another thing that surprised me, was how significant music was in Scotland. There's a wonderful quote um, by this guy Topham. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, there it is. This guy Topham, he was a journalist. When the journalist and playwright Edward Topham, his dates are 1751 to 1820. When he visited Edinburgh in 1775, he was particularly struck by Scottish fascination with music. In his letters from Edinburgh, he wrote, "The degree of attachment which is shown to music in general in this country exceeds belief. It is not only the principal entertainment, but the constant topic of every conversation. It would be vain," he reports, "to try to introduce other subjects of discussion in intellectual society. Everything must give place to music. Music alone engrosses every idea. In religion, a Scotsman is grave and abstracted. In politics, serious and deliberate. It is in the power of harmony alone to make him an enthusiast."
Love that. Love it. And
Yeah.
how does this now translate to the modern day and how we treat education? So you write about interweaving literature and folk song. What place do you think ballads have in modern liberal arts education? And I know I would love for you to talk again about how you taught a class that was listed as both literature and music. And I'd also love you to repeat what you said about the students that took that class.
Right. Um, balladry is a species of oral poetry. So there's no point in not, and the Norton Anthology, which I talk about in the very first prologue of this, the Norton Anthology of English Literature, of course, has ballads in it. And when Francis James Child was given the task of teaching the very first class on vernacular English literature at Harvard, when that was handed to him, one of the things that he rounded up 150 volumes of English poetry, everything you can think of, including he introduced Chaucer to America. But he included 8 volumes of ballads in that compendium because he thought that ballads were the earliest known poetry and that they had to be in there. And that, like the famous Homeric epics, they are oral poetry, and they have all the hallmarks of oral poetry, and that they're fascinating, and it's a very different feel from written poetry. Um, there are generic qualities to oral poetry, which you learn when you're reading the Odyssey or the Iliad. I mean, any teacher teaching those texts has to talk about alliteration and repetition and formulaic phrasing and um, uh, stock characters. And I mean, those things all there, and they have to be, and they give a completely different atmosphere to the poetry. So I think ballads absolutely should be taught in any course on English literature, and I think there should be lots more courses on English literature. I think that uh, we are getting too far. We are getting too instrumental in our education. People aren't learning things that are beautiful anymore. They're only learning things that will be useful for getting a job, which is really dreadful.
Agreed.
Yeah, and it's not even worth talking about the fact that the Department of Education is being, as we speak, torn apart.
Mm-hmm.
So the students who have taken my course on folk music of North America and British Isles, which I taught with a wonderful man from the music department. We co-taught it together. And the students who took that class over the, whatever it was, 15 years that we taught it, every once in a while would write to me and would thank me for having opened that world to them. And I got more of that kind of acknowledgement from students in that class than students in any of my other classes, because that world really had been closed to them, but it opened up. And I mean, just the other day, a student from a long time ago visited here in Boston, came to a conference, and she was talking about how she's still playing her fiddle in sessions. She's going to folk sessions and playing her fiddle.
Had she just been a violinist before, and then
Yes.
That's great. I love that.
Then she started playing tunes. Yeah. And that was great. And started going to folk festivals, and she now lives in the Berkeley area, and she is putting together a group of people that can make music together. It's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is really wonderful that you were able to introduce folk music to so many people
Yeah.
over those years. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And I'm also really thankful. Thank you for introducing your book to me, because I've been enjoying it so much. And thank you for introducing it
Oh.
to the Folk Files listeners. And so thank you so much for being on the show and for chatting with me.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thomas Thomas lay on yon grassy bank, and he beheld a lady gay, a lady that was brisk and bold, come riding o'er the ferny brae.
Thank you for joining me for this interview with Ruth Perry. As a reminder, all the information about how to buy the book, with a discount code, listen to the ballads, and purchase the CD are in the episode notes. You can also find a list of the ballad clips that I've played as part of the episode. In the background is Thomas the Rymer, the first ballad that Ruth discusses in her book. Thomas the Rymer was a real historical figure, a Scottish laird who is said to have the gift of prophecy. This ballad gives a mythical explanation for his gifts, claiming that he was whisked off by the Queen of Elfland to her magical realm. Please enjoy the full ballad, performed by Alison McMorland. Stay tuned for the regular December episode of Folk Files in a couple weeks, and, as always, thanks for listening.
She said, "That name does not belong to me. I am but the Queen of fair Elfland, and I'm come here to visit ye. But ye mun go wi' me now," she cried. "True Thomas, ye mun go wi' me, for ye mun serve me 7 years. Through weal or way as may chance to be." She turned about her milk-white steed, and took true Thomas up behind, and whene'er the bridle rang, her steed flew swifter than the wind. Oh, they rade on and further on, until they come to a garden green. Lie down, O ye lady free. Some o' that fruit let me pull to ye. "Oh no, Thomas," she said, "that fruit mun not be touched by ye, for all the plagues that are in hell light on the fruit of this country. But I hae a loaf here in my lap, likewise a bottle o' claret wine, and now ere we go further on, we'll rest a while and ye may dine." When he had eaten and drunk his fill, "Lay your head upon my knee," the lady said, "and ere we climb yon high hill, I will show ye fairlies 3. Oh, see not ye yon narrow road, so thick beset with thorns and briars? That is the path o' righteousness, though after it but few enquire. And see not ye that braid road that lies across yon lily leaven? That is the path o' wickedness, though some call it the road to heaven. And see not ye that bonny road which winds about the ferny brae? man gay. But Thomas, ye man haud your tongue, whate'er ye hear, whate'er ye see, for any word you should chance to speak, you'll ne'er get back to your ain country. For 40 days and 40 nights he wade through reed blood tae the knee, and he saw neither sun nor moon, but he heard the roaring o' the sea. He has gotten a coat o' the even cloth, and a pair of shoes o' the velvet green, till 7 years were past and gane. True Thomas on earth he was never seen.